And Esau was a cunning hunter, a man of the field. All right? So, Esau grows up, and he's a mighty man, a man of the field. Now, that word, cunning hunter, is the same word used to describe Nimrod. You remember him early on in Genesis. And he was like the first great hunter that came upon the world. And they're characters like Trump almost. Right? They're just real manly people who take control. He would have been athletic. Everything he put his hand to, he was absolutely brilliant at. He was fierce. He was ruthless. He was successful in whatever he did. Whatever he touched, he was successful, and he grew, and he was a great businessman. All these traits were the traits of Nimrod, and they're the traits of Esau. That's what he's like. He's active. He's fierce. He's ruthless. And it's all the characteristics of what the world admires, don't they, in people? The ultimate people in the world. Maybe not everyone of Trump, right? But characteristics like that, of success, of ruthfulness, of business, of trading, of taking a chance and being an entrepreneur. All these kind of things were the things that Esau was. And it says there as well that he's a man of the field. That's interesting, isn't it? That he was a man of the field. All right? Now, that expression, just quickly come back, right, to Genesis chapter 2 and verse 19. This expression of the field is one that God uses right from the start about animals. All right? Look at verse 19. And out of the ground, Yahweh God formed every beast of the field. Okay? Beast of the field. And here's Esau. He's hairy. And he loves the field and loves getting out with the field. And in a way, when you looked at Esau, he was like an animal, wasn't he? Right? The way he was built, the way he looked, the way he ran across the fields hunting. He was like an animal. And that's the point that God is making. He was like an animal. But see, God, right from the start, didn't he? He separated and gave a different purpose to man than all the rest of the creatures that came upon the world. We know this verse in verse 26 of chapter 1 of Genesis. Look what he says. And God said, right, we've made everything now. But now we want to make something very special and unique and different. And he says, verse 26, and God said, let us make man in our image. We're going to make someone who looks like us. And not only is he going to look like us, but look what he goes on to say, verse 26, and after our likeness. He's going to have this man, different from all the rest of the beasts of the field, he's going to have the capacity to develop my character and think like me. That's what the destiny can be for man. But you see, look what Esau chose. Esau chose to be just like the beasts of the field. And he's had so much potential, like every person does, to ultimately live to our potential, which God wants, and that's to be like him. But Esau just was like a beast of the field. He's like an animal. See how beautifully God makes that point? And some people do that, don't they? They're just like animals. And they never aspire to their potential, which God has for everyone who is wanting and willing to take it. All right? So he was a man of the field. Let's go back to Genesis chapter 25. Now, the next thing it describes is Jacob. And Jacob is described very differently. In verse 27, it says, and Jacob was a plain man dwelling in tents. Now, that description, I just think, has been hijacked a little bit. Like, you always see Jacob as like, in the Sunday school book, he's the most nerdy guy you've ever seen in your life, right? He's in the tent with mum, right? And he doesn't like going outside, right? His skin's a bit pale. He's the most nerdy person ever. And it's probably all taken from that word plain, right? Jacob was a plain man. But it actually doesn't mean that, all right? Jacob was, and as we will find out, he's not plain and boring. He's intelligent, he's active, he's interesting, he's spiritual. He's an intelligent guy. And that word plain actually means upright. That's what it means. He was a man who was upright, a man who had integrity. In fact, this is where that other word's used. Job 1 verse 1. There was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job, and that man was perfect and upright. He's like Job. He's upright. He's a man of integrity. He's got problems, but he's different to Esau in that way. He's not plain and he's not boring. Now, the other reason we think that he's plain and boring is because it says, then he was dwelling in tents. And the picture I've always had of Jacob dwelling in tents is he's doing cross-stitch with mum in the tent. Esau's out like he's just killing animal after animal. And there's Jacob, just doing stitch after stitch with mum in the tent, all right? He's just the most nerdy guy in the world. But again, that's not what the record is trying to tell us, right? It's trying to tell us that this man actively chose to be a tent dweller. Because that's what his dad chose to do. And that's what his grandpa chose to do. And that idea of a sojourner is just, that's the life. That in Hebrews 11, that's the thing that's highlighted about these fathers. They decided, I don't want the world. I just want to be a sojourner and wait for the kingdom. And this is telling us that that's what Jacob had decided he wanted. There's a beautiful contrast here, which we haven't got time to go to, but when it describes Esau's life, okay, and there's a whole chapter given to Esau's life in Genesis chapter 36, and it says all the amazing things he did. He built cities, and he had kings and dukes, and he had all these things, and all this massive giant family. And then the next chapter, chapter 37, it introduces Jacob, and it says, and Jacob was a sojourner in tents. Because that's what he chose. He chose a different life to his brother. And that's what we're being told here in that record when it says he was a sojourner. He actually chose and said, you know what, I want this truth. I think there might be something in it. And that's what he decided to do. Now, these two boys, they're so different. They're on different paths in life. Their lives look completely different. And of course, what does this do? It creates division in the house, doesn't it? And we see that division in verse 28. It says, and Isaac loved Esau because he did eat of his venison, but Rebekah loved Jacob. So there creates in this house, as a result of the completely different lifestyles of these two boys, a division in the household. And perhaps Isaac was quite a guy who maybe wasn't that good at tennis, right? But when he saw his son, okay, he loved him because he was brilliant at everything. I just imagine them going out and playing golf, right? Esau going to come play golf, and Esau says, yes, let's go. And he says, come on, you come as well, Jacob. And Jacob's like, oh, here we go. Right? And they go out in the course, and Esau tees up on the first, and he just smacks it down the fairway so long. Isaac's like, oh, there's my boy, right? And Jacob just hits it over there into the bush. And Jacob probably felt that growing up. I feel for Jacob. He would have hated it, wouldn't he? That his father loved his brother so much, and that he could never be as good. He could never be as great as what his brother was. But his mother, who we're going to find is an extremely perceptive woman, who understands God and spiritual things as a lot of women do more than men a lot of the time. And she loved Jacob. She'd got the dream from God. And she loved this man, Jacob, with all her heart. So there's division in the household. We're going to see tomorrow, that division opens right up, right, in the family. Okay? It becomes all open for everyone to see. But it's already bubbling away. Now, verse 29 to verse 34, finally we have this story about the birthright. Now, what was the birthright all about? Well, the birthright in the Bible is about, it's about the future. It was all about whoever got the birthright would become almost like the priest of the family. He would have the authority of the family. He would have the inheritance of the family. Okay, so the birthright is all about the future. And this little story is going to give us an insight into the brains of this man Jacob and the brain of this man Esau to see what they thought about the future and how their lives were governed according to what the future was like. All right? And it's very different the way that these two boys approach this. So, verse 29, Jacob sod pottage. All right? So he's cooking up some lentils in the tent with Mum. And Esau comes in after being in the field all day. Okay, hairy, he's covered in sweat. And he comes into the tent. And he's absolutely famished. And he says in verse 30, and Esau said to Jacob, feed me, I pray thee, with some of that red pottage, for I am faint. Therefore his name was called Edom. So he comes in and all he wants is this pottage to satisfy him. Right? Another translation of that verse says, feed me some of this red stuff. Yes, this red stuff, because I am starving. Now, red pottage comes from the word Edom or Adam. Right? And it represents earthly pleasure. And that's what Esau was all about. It represented his life. And he craved this kind of earthly pleasure as the number one key thing that he was trying to get out of life. And this little story demonstrates that with just even the way that he eats up that meal. That's what he wanted in life. And verse 32, after Jacob says, all right, sell me the birthright then. If you want this food, right, it's nice food. Put some seriously good garnish in it. You want it, don't you? And Esau says this in verse 32. And Esau said, behold, I am at the point of death. What profit is that birthright to me? I'm about to die. Of what profit is that stupid birthright? He saw no value in God's benefits unless they were here and now, unless they were felt in the present. And anything beyond death was useless for Esau. He just wanted stuff now. Birthright, who cares about the birthright? That's all about the future. I don't care about it. All I care about is stuff to have right now that can fulfill my stomach right now. And that was Esau's view of life. And that's the view of life of most people in this world, isn't it? Eat, drink, and be merry, because tomorrow we're going to be dead, and anything beyond death is absolutely useless and of no point to me. So I will get what I can right now out of this bowl, and I'll lick it right up, and then I'll be done with it. That's what Esau's view of life was. And that's what he does. Verse 34. And Jacob gave Esau the bread and the pottage and the lentils, and he did eat and drink and rose up and went his way. So he tasted this beautiful pottage, but it lasted just a moment. And then it was gone. He ate and he drank, and then he rose up and he went his way. And that's the way Esau lived. And it's like the Broadway, isn't it? Like we talked about at the start. He said, you know what? I'm just going to make the most of my life now and everything that I can get from it. And I'm going to live this amazing life today. That's what I'm going to do. And you know what? Esau did do that. As we already said, if you go and read Genesis chapter 36 about what Esau became. He became an amazing man in the world. He was successful. He begat kings and dukes. He was an entrepreneur, and he married into an entrepreneurial family. And he married into his wives and hung out with influential people. He was rich. He was famous. He was likeable. He would have been the kind of guy at a party that everyone would have loved, and people wanted to take a selfie with him or put him on Instagram. All this kind of stuff. That was Esau. He was like the guy in the world. He had this amazing presence, and his life was enticing. It's like, I want to be like this guy. Look at his life. Look what he's got. He's got so much stuff. He's awesome. And he did. He had all of that stuff. And he had all of that success. He had everything. Except one thing. He had no future. He had no future. Nothing. When he died, all of that life, it was gone. And there's plenty of Esau's in the world today, isn't there? And I've just selected a few in that picture that most of us will recognise. And those kind of people we look at, and sometimes, maybe a lot of times, we look at their life with envy because they're successful. They take chances. They're entrepreneurs. They get rich. They go out and achieve their goal. They do amazing things. And they're popular and likeable and people love them. But just like Esau, there's no future. When they're gone, they're gone. And all the money and all the fame and all the celebrity, it's gone. That's the reality of life. And that's what Esau was like. He despised his birthright. Now, God's summary of that is actually beautiful tragic, really, in verse 34. The last phrase of verse 34. And Esau despised his birthright. He had it there. The future was in his hand. And he treated it like an ordinary meal. And that's actually what Hebrews says. Hebrews 12 says this. No one is immoral or unholy like Esau, who sold his birthright for a single meal. Isn't that beautiful, the way God describes our whole life and all the opportunities and everything we can have in it and all the great things? God says, you know what it's like compared to what I'm offering you? It's like a little bowl of baked beans, right? Or organic lentils, if that's your preferred option. God says, that's what it's like. And Esau sold that precious birthright for that little bowl of baked beans. Our birthright, brothers and sisters, is precious. And I suppose I talk to the young people particularly, right? Anyone who's young here who hasn't come to know God yet, like what you have been offered or what we've come to know is so precious. It's the future. It's eternity. And how many people are there who just walk past it? What a tragedy that is, to walk past that birthright. And that's what Jesus said in Matthew chapter 7 about the broad way, about the narrow way and the broad way. He said, you know what the narrow way? He said something about the narrow way. He said, most people never even find it. They just start their life, they think they go down the broad way, and they never, ever even see the possibilities in the narrow way. And that's a tragedy, isn't it? But we've got it. God's given it to us. And that's absolutely precious. Right, let's quickly do Jacob. Jacob, he's completely different to that. Verse 31, when Esau comes in from the field, the first thing that comes into Jacob's mind, and you can tell what's been happening in this man's mind, he's been thinking about this the whole time, right? This has been going around his mind forever, okay? The birthright, it's absolutely top of mind. He loves the birthright, right? And the first opportunity that presents itself, he's like, right, here it is, an opportunity for me to take that birthright. And here it is. He sees the sweaty beast come in. He says, right, sell it to me right now. You see how those two people are different? Jacob has top of mind the birthright. And the only reason that's possible is because he has thought carefully about that. He's found out about it. He's found out about the promises that were given to Grandpa and the blessing that was given to his dad and how he left Ur and all that kind of stuff. And he's thought, you know what? There's something in all that and I want it and I want to be a part of it. And he thinks, right, how do I get it? And so he plans this scheme. And he goes and takes the birthright at first opportunity. Verse 33. And Jacob said, swear to me this day. And he sware unto him, and he sold the birthright to Jacob. So Jacob takes it. Okay? So Jacob is very different to Esau because he values the birthright, the future, the spiritual things. But we look at that story and the way that he got the birthright, and we think, hang on a second, was the way that Jacob got the birthright fair? And the answer, of course, is no. He gets it by manipulation and by deception. And if you looked at the behaviour of these two men on the surface, you would probably even conclude that, you know what, Esau's behaviour is probably more honourable than what Jacob's is. So Jacob is flawed. He's not perfect. He's got a lot of problems going on in his life, a lot of problems. And two of the big ones are he needs to learn to wait on God. And the other thing he needs to learn is that the end does not justify the means. But his desire and value of spiritual things is what God loved. Because that desire and love and appreciation from spiritual things means that God can work with him. He could never work with Esau, could he? Because Esau didn't want God. He doesn't want God. I'm not interested in God at all. I'm doing my own thing. I'm going my own way. But Jacob is not perfect. But he sees value in God and spiritual things, and God says, that's a man I can work with. And that's step one of our growth towards God. We see value in him. And we see value in his ways, and God says, I can work with a person like that. But he's terrible, his character's shocking. Look at all the things he's got. He's got sins, his faults. He's a terrible man. And God says, I don't care. He values me. And I can start to develop my character in him. And that's what this man is going to happen to him. God's going to start a journey with him. And he's going to grow him and develop his character over the course of his life. Now, that is why I love Jacob and I love studying this man. Because Jacob is a man that gives us hope. All right? I can relate to Jacob, and his life is full of failure a lot of the time. And I can relate to that. But that failure of behaviour does not mean that God will not work with him. What God needs is someone who wants to be like him, who values spiritual things. And God will work with the character of that particular person as he worked with Jacob and as he will for us. And it's a project that God has to do over a lifetime. And that's what he does with Jacob, and that's what he'll do with you and me. Let's finish in Psalm 37, where these beautiful verses summarise, I think, the two lives of Esau and Jacob. Psalm 37, and I'll read from verse 35. We'll read verse 35 to 38. And here the psalmist beautifully describes these two characters. I have seen the wicked in great power and spreading himself like a green bay tree. That's Esau, isn't it? Yet he passed away. And lo, he was not. And yea, I sought him, but he could not be found. But mark the perfect man. Behold the upright. That's the word about Jacob. For the end of that man is peace. But the transgressors shall be destroyed together. The end of the wicked shall be cut off.